Happy New Year to all of you. I hope you had a fun and healthy holiday season. The podcast team here decided to take some much-needed time off for the holidays. So today we've got a re-release of one of our earliest and favorite episodes featuring Marcus Jamison of the University of South Carolina. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Take care and talk to you soon. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Marcus Jamison. Marcus is a poet and scholar from Hamlet, North Carolina. He's in his final year as an MFA candidate in poetry at the University of South Carolina, where he serves as a senior editor for Yamasee Journal. His poems have appeared in Barely South Review and Quarterly West, as the 2017 winner of an AWP Intro Journals Award. He has also been a finalist for the Scotty Merrill Award and for 92Y's Discovery Poetry Contest. A fellow of the Watering Hole, he is also an avid fiction and nonfiction writer. Today, Marcus has brought two poems to read for us to open the show.
A Statue of Limitations. She rocks all pink, pink racket, pink shoes, on the tennis court across from Maxie Gregg Park, named for a man who fought and died to keep her ancestors chained. Yet here she is unfettered. Her matching wristband flicks with each careful bounce, and through the chain-link fence, I make note of her footwork. The nimble pivot of a young Serena in making, moves I imagine were handed down in the graceful dodge of runaways. Summer is over, and the air has grown cool. The old relics are being raised at incredible rates. That worn stone currency of hatred leveled, erased from all of history's books, or uneventfully tucked into the back, as the people in cities all across this land grow wary of what is held in symbol or in name. Robert E. Lee, scrub from Virginia. Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben slip from the pantry. Even Mississippi, whose name means Father of Waters, has finally decided to ditch that flag. Yet Maxie remains, along with J. Marion Sims, and how can anyone forget about Old Strom, favorite son of Dixie, who served and died believing that the South should have won, long after the young maid caught his eye, after he paid for his secret daughter's schooling, then tried to read civil rights down. Perhaps this is the true limit of progress. These memories passed on like dead-faced money. This nagging feeling that you're playing from behind, fighting a good fight but still stuck at love. The young girl lobs the ball overhead, her ascent and strike equal parts power and beauty. The sure ace might warrant a round of applause if she weren't on the court all along. A Certain Hospitality after Roger Reeves. Down here, these creek beds holler. Swirl a hint of progress and brown liquor beneath the tongue, then see which one seeps first. The chicken spot under the bridge serves lukewarm hope with a side of biscuits. Uncles who did bids in 5x10s or Vietnam sit in understaffed temp agencies still hoping for the trickle down of opportunity. Grandmama on the front porch swing, and all them babies freeze tag the yard till their mamas come scoop them. On time, please, because Wednesday nights mean prayer meeting. A cool breeze creeps in to blot the sun-soaked summer days. Cherry red Buick shines sufficient in the yard, and maybe we can stave off these blues with a little soap, a fresh coat of wax, or a deuce and a half pint of Paul. We are always sharing ourselves with something. The river's song, a black knight's plea, our troubled past trampled by history's bare feet. Sometimes I cry myself to sleep thinking of abandoned lots and the new Jim Crow, all the dead homies getting high blood pressure. On the other side of the county, them Grove boys bust plenty shots, then peel out on four-wheelers. We have lost too many to the wrong sides of a gun. But I don't believe the fallacy of the lost cause. Too many of mine have swallowed through the choke and spit of their force-fed demise. So we delight in nights steep honeysuckle sweet, sitting 10 deep on somebody's porch, the pulse of music, us teeth and gums, riotous in our blasphemy. Down here, God gets lost in the remains of deserted textile mills, sleeps easy in a rusted railway car, is a chicken plant fire that claims kin. My mama was a prayerful woman, held good book and church fan in hand, with hopes that we might shake these demons. I hold on to a bit of her generous ways, offer warm embrace to both guest and stranger, from where a patch of land and the gall to tend it are the only means some folk have. Can't nobody tell me about humility. It's the sand spur etched in my throat, these dirt roads coursing my veins, a shout out to every crumbling hamlet that, though backwoods, still stands.
Marcus, thanks for reading that and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jared. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I have to be honest. Often when the guests are reading their piece at the beginning, I'm like nervously getting ready for the first question I'm going to ask, but I couldn't help but just listen intently. That was such a good reading.
Thank you. Thank you.
And really beautiful poems.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, one thing you told me before the interview was that you love the way place and geography subtly enter all of our work. Place plays a big role in both of these poems, but in slightly different ways, I think. So let's start with A Statue of Limitations. Maxcy Gregg was a real person, a Confederate general. Maxcy Gregg Park is a real place in Columbia, South Carolina, where your university is located. This poem, to me, creates a real emotional juxtaposition between this inspiring Serena-like figure going about her work in the shadow of this inescapable past. So I'm curious, was there a real tennis player? Tell me about writing this poem. How did this setting influence you when you were writing this?
So because I'm new to Columbia, or relatively new, I've only been here about 3 years, of course, the program time. And I became kind of obsessed with like the places in Columbia. Columbia's a beautiful city, but also a city that kind of frustrates you at times. There's a lot of historical stuff that Columbia holds on to that other places. And maybe that's just like South Carolina in general. So there very much was a tennis player. I didn't make the connection to Maxcy Gregg Park until later. But I remember just watching this young girl play tennis, and she was probably about maybe 8 or 9, maybe a little bit older. But she was playing by herself, and she's just like hitting these like beautiful shots. And I'm thinking in my mind, like, okay, that's determination. That's like she's out there practicing with herself. And then when I saw the Maxcy Gregg part, I'm one of those people that when I see a name, I kind of like always like break out the Google, break out Wikipedia. I'm looking it up. And then I was reading about this guy, and I'm like, wow, that's crazy that this park is right beside this tennis court that where this girl was playing. So that kind of was where the poem was born from. But I kind of made connections to other stuff that was happening. A lot of stuff happened over the summer with like Robert E. Lee, all these brands changing their names, taking things down, or the people sometimes going out and doing it for them, like forcefully taking things down. So,
yeah. Well, I was going to ask, I mean, the Maxcy Gregg Park is not the only memorial to Confederates in South Carolina or in Columbia for that matter. So how does living there and seeing those things, you said you're the kind of person who likes to look up names and see what they did. How does that affect your writing? Does that inspire you often?
I definitely take more inspiration in the people fighting to remove some of these things. Mm-hmm. But you can't help but think about, like, when you're surrounded by all of this history, all of these different things, like, that becomes the place that you move in every day. I didn't know who J. Marion Sims was until I read about the statue. There's a statue in Columbia of him, and he's the father of gynecology. But he also experimented on 4 slave women. I think it was 4, maybe 3, but to the point where other doctors wouldn't work with him and he wouldn't use anesthesia, things like that.
So now I'm thinking about these protesters fighting to get some of these memorials and monuments taken down. Have you participated in any of that? Or I guess mainly I'm curious if you consider your writing to be like a form of protest.
Well, writing is definitely a form of protest. I participated in protests. I used to live next to the Columbia police station, and they pepper sprayed my front yard, so I had to get active. it's like they brought the fight to my house, basically. But
yeah,
when I think about writing as a form of protest, because a lot of people say like, well, what can writing do? It's just words. But I think a lot of times those words, we go back to them. We use them as like a catalyst to do these actions, to have these conversations. A lot of people are on social media sharing these quotes and things to keep morale up, to motivate people, to kind of convince people that this is a fight worth fighting. And that's where I think writing comes in. It definitely like can trigger, if not the current generation, maybe a future generation that sees that writing years later and makes them want to act.
Well, in this poem, I thought there's a lot of hope in it for the fact that things are changing and getting better. It's hard, when watching the news now and, like participating in some of these protests to feel like things are getting better. But it does feel like when reading this poem that there is a feeling of hope there. So what are you hoping that this poem might accomplish?
And that's the one thing I'm still constantly thinking about revisions with probably all my poems, but this one definitely is something I wrote more recently. And I don't want that hope to leave. So in all the revisions, I definitely want to keep that sense of hope, because one of the things I was thinking about is there are all these statues and monuments that have been taken down, but there are countless others that will never be taken down. And regardless of whether they're taken down or not, the history doesn't go away. Some of the impact doesn't go away. This feeling of I'm constantly fighting the same battle over and over again, that doesn't go away. So a little bit of hope is something nice to have when you think about all of that.
So when you're writing a poem like this, does it give you hope when putting these words together? Because it does, I imagine it does get frustrating to feel like things are just the same and it's the same conversations and it's the same actions, but the same things keep happening. Is there solace to be found in writing for you?
Definitely, because I think it helps me I'm one of those people that like sit with things, sit with thoughts. I know a lot of people don't go back to the news and read it or don't want to see it. They'll turn their timelines off. I'm kind of the opposite. I'm one of those people that will digest a lot of it and then it gets heavy. Mm-hmm. And I think the writing is the way that I kind of release some of that. So that's the biggest hope for me. But I definitely I do want to think it can lead to real change. I do want to think eventually somewhere down the line, some of these things will change for the better permanently and not just be a constant battle that you have to keep fighting.
Well, according to your bio on the university website, you hail from the backwoods of Hamlet, North Carolina, a town of about 6,000 people. Is it safe to say that the other poem, A Certain Hospitality, which ends with the line, "A shout out to every crumbling hamlet that, though backwoods, still stands," is that an ode to your hometown?
It is very much an ode to my hometown.
So tell me about Hamlet.
I don't really write about my hometown a lot, which is something that I'm accepting more. Hamlet is one of those places. It has 6,000 people, but sometimes it feels like 600 because everybody knows everybody or knows somebody that knows them. So it really it really feels smaller than it is. And it's typical small Southern town. Like, there's a friendliness, there's a kind of general appeal. I think people visiting like to stop through because, it's this quiet town. It seems kind of lazy, kind of laid back, but it also has a history. And I think I was hoping this poem kind of captured some of those people and the things that were actually in this place outside of the tourists, because people know Hamlet from like, there was a chicken plant fire in the 90s that I think it killed like 26 people. And it's also like a railroad town in the 1900s. So either you know it for the railroad museum or the chicken plant fire. And that's about it.
Well, in it, you write about the creek beds and the dirt roads coursing your veins. So is there something about the place and geography of Hamlet that you find inspiring?
It's very much like one of those towns that you can like, you just want to take your shoes off and like just go outside. Like, and there are different parts. I think you can definitely find like, like red clay hills, but you can also find like the river. You can go to different parts of Hamlet and just like relax, be at one with nature. And there's always like somebody that you can share that experience with, even if you're not like necessarily close to them, because everybody's kind of sharing those same experiences.
So with Statute of Limitations, it's mostly focused on like a specific issue, like with the Confederate memorials. But a certain hospitality seems to have a broader kind of economic message in it. At least that's how I read it, as it refers to the remains of deserted textile mills and people still hoping for the trickle down of opportunity. So in what ways would you say are the two messages in conversation with each other in both of those poems?
Well, a certain hospitality is definitely like kind of focused on how generations struggled a little bit in similar ways. Like, you think about the generation that went off to war, I guess beginning with like Vietnam, and then came back to these places that were, all the industries were gone or fading. They couldn't find jobs. And then my generation, which grew up in the 80s, which was kind of like this crazy, like, on one hand, credits booming, money's like growing, globalization's happening, but it's also like the war on drugs. It's also all of this stuff that's happening in Central and South America that's having an impact on the economy in the United States. So those two things like kind of butting heads a little bit. And Hamlet is very much one of those places where you see it, but not necessarily know why it's happening, because maybe the people there don't have all of that background. They don't know the history of some of the things that are happening. So they're just experiencing it. They just know that all of these plants are closing. I can't find a job, so what do I do now? Kind of tying that to a statute of limitations, I think. When we think about, like, I guess, systemic racism in general, we always, I feel like, want to, I don't know about find a scapegoat. Maybe that's not the right term, but we want there to be a villain. We want there to be a bad guy. And sometimes it's a system of things that are lining up together. So very much those same people who are putting up those monuments, putting up those ideas that say this person shouldn't be allowed in this place, are the same people who don't have to deal with that economic tragedy in the same way because they're far removed from it. It's those people that they don't want in those places that end up having to live in that place that has no jobs or all the industries are gone. So I think they're very much connected, even if they feel far apart.
I'm also from a small town. I'm just thinking about, like growing up and watching businesses leave,
Right.
like the buildings that were full when I was a kid, just slowly emptied out throughout my childhood. I'm also thinking about redlining, even in my tiny town, that I think people just have no real idea why or how that happened.
Right.
It's just like a miseducation, or these things have been happening for so long that people don't realize what it means or how it started.
There's a city about maybe 30 minutes from my town called Southern Pines, North Carolina. They play the U.S. Open golf tournament there. And when you think about redlining, something like that, how this town becomes one of the wealthiest places in the part of the state, and this little town 30 minutes away is struggling, I think that definitely like ties in.
Yeah. And, I'm not making for excuses for anyone who, perpetuates these things, even if they don't understand or don't know what they're doing, because it's a responsibility to figure it out and to make change. But I do think that literature, poetry, stories can be a way to educate people on these things in ways that maybe they don't have access to otherwise. Maybe they don't have access to the kind of programs that we're in that could teach them that more directly. Well, I want to talk a bit about craft, because I know you said that spotlighting craft is really important to you. I'm certainly not a poet. I have much less knowledge of the craft of poetry than I do prose. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about the craft of writing A Certain Hospitality, which is modeled after the poet Roger Reeves, right?
Yes. So it was interesting reading. The Roger Reeves poem is called Southern Charm. And when I saw, because he literally names Hamlet, North Carolina, out in his poem.
Oh, okay.
And I was fascinated, okay, I want to capture what this poem captures, but talk about it as somebody from there. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I noticed when I was reading his work is the way that the place kind of comes to life. So you capture landmarks and spots and things that people from there would know. And I tried to incorporate a little bit of that into the poem. People from Hamlet will know the chicken spot that I'm talking about because that's the only one there. That's the one that everybody goes to. And things like that, trying to capture the place and bring it to life, as well as the people. But one of the things I did want to avoid was copying the poem directly or making it too close, because I did want it to be my own poem. So sometimes I guess a good craft lesson when you're writing after another poet is thinking about because when you see that word after, that can invoke so many different things. It can be after the tone, after the language, after some thematic thing, just after the title itself and nothing else. So I like the fact that you can kind of write in the voice of somebody else, but make it your own voice or make it your own idea.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you were mostly trying to capture the feeling more than anything else, because I was curious about that. When you say after, is it a little bit intimidating though?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I remember one of my first mentors, Ramika Bingham-Risher, poet extraordinaire. She's out of Norfolk, Virginia. I tried to write a poem after Lucille Clifton, and she saw it and she said, "Take it out." She's like, "You haven't earned the right to write after her yet." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So it's definitely sometimes daunting to think about when you want to include that. I guess the implications of it, because that's the first thing people are going to do. They see that name and now they're going to look for it everywhere in the poem.
Yeah. Especially when it's a big name like Lucille Clifton.
Right.
Yeah. So you mentioned writing that poem, trying to write that poem after Lucille Clifton, and then abandoning it. Now you're writing after Roger Reeves. So how would you say that your understanding of craft has changed from then to now, or even since starting the MFA program?
Well, I think I've learned. Well, I've been fortunate to be around a lot of really good poets, so that helps. And I read a lot. I read all the time. So I think those two things kind of inform more. I'm not as timid about putting that after up there. Not to say that I'm on Roger Reeves level or anything like that, but it's thinking about, well, I do know things about voice. I do know things about lineation and how it can influence how the tone of a poem shifts. So just becoming more comfortable in that, I think. Yeah, when I was writing that after Lucille Clifton poem, I was like nowhere near like, okay, no.
Well, but you have to do that first, right? You have to try and screw it up before you can write a great poem like this one, which I do think is really good.
Thank you.
So let's talk about the MFA program a bit. South Carolina, the program was established 30 years ago by James Dickey at the University of South Carolina. It's a 3-year program. It accepts 4 poets and 4 fiction writers each year. So each workshop contains 12 writers. This is according to the website. It has a stellar faculty. I mean, I still can't really wrap my head around the idea that you get to work with Nikki Finney. So what drew you to the program?
Well, funny that you mention it. Nikki Finney is what drew me to the program.
I figured.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, I feel like I came to the idea of getting an MFA late. Like, I feel like it took me forever to even finish like undergrad because a lot of stuff had happened. So it was like about 10, 12 years removed from when I started. And when I went to Old Dominion University in Virginia, I was looking at their MFA program because all the faculty there, Tim Siebels, Sherry Reynolds, they had a really good faculty, and it made me want to, because I've always loved to write. I've always known that I would teach in some form or fashion, whether I love it or hate it. So once I saw that program, I started to look at other programs a little bit more seriously. And I knew, number one, I didn't want to go into debt doing an MFA. And there were certain poets that I wanted to work with if I got accepted into a program.
Mm-hmm. So you said you took like 10 years off. Was that between undergrad and the MFA program?
Well, no, that was, so when I originally went to undergrad, I did not finish. And a lot of stuff happened in that meantime. I was having seizures for a while. I had a kid. So life happened.
Yeah.
And then I finally got the opportunity to go back, and I finished the undergrad and said, okay, what am I going to do next? Mm-hmm. And I knew I wanted to write. So I was like, let me find the MFA program for me.
So do you think life happening, as you put it, has helped you to develop as a writer?
Well, it definitely gives you like more experiences, things that you can draw from, like, which is funny because I haven't really written about the seizures like most people would assume I would. When I tell people, they're like, oh, do you write about your seizures? And I haven't. I don't know why. Maybe something I'm avoiding. There's a lot of other stuff to feel that.
I also took about 10 years off, but that was between my undergraduate degree and the MFA. And for me, having that time off and living a little, so to speak, was super important for me. I think I'm a much better writer and MFA student now than I would have been if I'd have gone when I was 23 or 24. So it's a pretty small program. Do you find that you get a lot of personal attention from the professors, since there's only 4 poetry students in each cohort?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest draws. Like, it's really close knit, really. All of the faculty members are very like hands on. They check in on you. They want to know what you're writing, what's going on in your life. Like, I think if it was because I also could have gone to another much bigger program and probably more, I guess, name recognition, but there was no funding or very little funding. And in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, they have this great faculty, but how much attention do you get from this great faculty? Right. So I like the smaller cohort and the kind of closer appeal of it all.
Well, I would take, close educational attention from Nikki Finney any day. So I'm a little jealous if you can't tell. Columbia, South Carolina is also only about 2 hours from your hometown. Was that a decision or a factor in your decision at all?
Well, it wasn't, but I think my family is, I have 5 sisters, so they were excited about it.
Are they still in Hamlet?
For the most part, yeah, they're mostly in Hamlet. So they were like, because I was saying things like California and New York, and they were like, "Oh God, you're going to be so far away." But
yeah,
I like it here. I think, like I said, it's a good city. It has its draws.
Well, the website for the university describes the program as inviting and dynamic, a good place for a writer or poet to evolve, experiment, learn, compose, and live. So would you agree with that assessment?
That's my first time hearing that. I definitely think it's a great place to experiment and compose. It's also a great place to like branch out and think about other things because of the way the program is structured. So you get an opportunity to both focus on your writing, but think about other stuff if you want to. And I like that part of the program.
So tell us a little bit about the structure. Like, how is it different?
So number one, it's a 3-year program. Most programs are 2. And one of the emphases of the program is in literature and theory. Mm-hmm. So you don't just have to take workshop and a few electives. It's workshop, literature, and a very like significant theory based. Like, maybe I'm not excited about that part. I do appreciate what it's offering and the opportunities it presents later, because now you can say I do have a background in theory. I do have this background in literature.
Well, another thing that seems pretty unique about the program, obviously I was poking around on the website and I saw that South Carolina has 4 different writers series events: the Open Book, Fall Literary Festival, Sharks Parlor, and the Southern Writers Series.
Yes. They do a lot of stuff. So the Open Book, I think, Elise Blackwell, who is on the fiction faculty, is like the host of this series, and it invites outside readers to come. They do a kind of like actual craft talk with the MFA students, and then they do a reading for the public. Nice. Unfortunately, because of everything going on, it got canceled this year. But it's a great program, and the writers that come in are often pretty big name writers. So that might be the, I guess, main reading series type thing. The Fall Writers Festival is a similar program, but a little bit different because it can be people from other disciplines. I think there's been some like graphic memoir writers, a lot of, one guy did comics. So it can be like pretty branched out, but still a very good series. I think this year Nikki Finney is doing the Writers Festival. Sharks Parlor is like the MFA reading, so that's
Okay.
us hanging out at a bar. Honestly, that's
Yeah.
great readings though. Like,
Uh-huh.
and they do sometimes occasionally bring in like former, like alumni and just some friends that they know, like other poets, other fiction writers, and it's more laid back because it takes place like kind of in a relaxed setting. I'm not sure if the Southern Writers like series is, I think it's a co-event thing. I think Richland Library has a lot to do with that. So it doesn't take place on campus. Usually it takes place off campus, but University of South Carolina just hosts it.
Oh, that's cool. Is it like free and open to the public?
Yeah, all of these events I think are free. And the fall festival will be taking place over Zoom. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the links are up on the website, but I think you just have to like reserve and then you can get a ticket. So
it's one of the things I love about literary festivals is it's always surprising to me how many of them are free.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go to a music like festival for free. It's going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? But a lot of these literary festivals with big names, you can walk in and like hear a craft talk or hear a reading. It's amazing. So South Carolina, you mentioned it's a fully funded program. According to the website, all MFAs teach in the English department and work in the University Writing Center under faculty mentorship. So what's teaching been like for you?
I enjoy it. Like I said, I've always known I was going to do some kind of teaching. Mm-hmm. I think I prefer literature to composition. I don't know. Composition is just, it feels like it drags out longer than it should. But I've had some really good students that have motivated me to keep going. Otherwise.
Yeah. That helps.
Yeah.
It is nice, though, when you're teaching a literature course and you can just choose those poems or those short stories that you love and share those with your students.
Have some conversations about them and not worry about all the extra stuff. But I do like the structure of the teaching load. It's kind of 2-1. And then
so you teach 2 classes in the fall and then one in the spring?
So I definitely like that. That makes that spring a little bit lighter.
Yeah. So how does the Writing Center factor into this?
So your very first year, so the program is fully funded except for your first semester, unless you get an additional like fellowship or something like that. And during that first semester, I think it's like 80% funded, and then you have to either be like a TA or work in the Writing Center. And during that time, you're also like taking some courses that will help you when you become a teacher. So that's kind of like the prep work. The Writing Center, I enjoyed my time in the Writing Center because I like the hands-on with the students. Like sometimes it can be high volume, especially around midterm, things like that. But you get to actually engage with a lot of different types of students. And I don't know, maybe I'm just strange. I like to read papers.
So are you in the Writing Center, are you working one-on-one with students on their writing?
Yes. Usually they set up an appointment and one tutor in the Writing Center will like go over the paper with them, give them feedback, and then they can set up another appointment if they feel like they're going to need more help.
Well, I have to say I'm not sure I've ever heard of a program that funds every semester except the first. That's pretty interesting. So you said it's about 80% funded that first semester. So does that mean that like 80% of the students are getting funded, or every student's getting 80% of what they normally would?
Well, I think it's like every student's getting roughly 80%. It's probably closer to like 75, but I also got a fellowship. Like I got the James Dickey Award the first semester I was there, so that helped kind of cover that balance. But compared to a lot of other programs, you might as well say it's fully funded because
yeah. I mean, it's pretty close. Yeah. And that's good that like all students are getting at least something that first semester.
right.
You also mentioned that you worked as a senior editor at Yumasi, the literary journal there. Did that replace your teaching position, or was that in addition to your teaching?
Yeah, I was about to say no. That's Yemisi is pretty much volunteer. Well, so the senior editors do get a stipend at the end of the year they serve as senior editors, but I've been working with Yemisi since I started. First as a poetry reader, and then as nonfiction editor. All of that's volunteer.
Have you enjoyed it?
I definitely enjoy it. I love reading new work from kind of like people who might be undiscovered, things like that. Like working with the journal also kind of gives you some ideas, like say you want to go into publishing, something like that. Kind of prepares you. So that's something that I could, if I ever step away from teaching, that might be a direction that I would go.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to ask, you're in your third year, right, in the program?
Yes.
So I was, you've mentioned a couple times teaching. I was curious if you had any kind of plans for next year, or if you're just putting off that decision as long as possible.
I'm terrified to think about what the future holds. I have some ideas. I do know I will pursue a PhD at some point. I don't know when that'll be. I'm also looking at a couple of fellowships at different places. And I may just like throw myself out there into this awful job market and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, you don't know until you try, right?
Right.
Cool. So before we go, do you have any advice for anyone who might be considering South Carolina MFA or an MFA program in general? And maybe you could talk about like what the reality of the MFA program has been versus your expectations of it before you started.
I guess the first thing I will say, and this is something that took me a long time to learn, you absolutely do not need an MFA to write. And I probably still would have pursued one because I enjoy the structure. I enjoy certain extra benefits, such as like the literature classes and things that I get to take while I'm pursuing this degree. But that's not for everybody. So I would say if you're going to look at South Carolina or any program, first decide if this is something that you really want to do, or you committed for 2 to 3 years to workshops and other graduate courses, probably not having a lot of free time as much as you think you will. It kind of goes away. And then just looking at like funding, things like that. Who's offering what funding? And is it a place that you think you'll get something beneficial from your work? One of the things I did, I looked at the cohorts that were already here before I applied to places. So I knew some of the people that were here, Joy Priest, Catherine Ntube. I knew their work already, and I knew that was somewhere I would be interested in going. And maybe that's not the path everybody will take, but I'm one of those people, like I said, I jump on Google and I try to find things.
Well, I'm exactly the same way. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, was so that people, if they're considering the South Carolina, they can hear from someone who is there right now and hear about his experience. And like going back to the idea of needing the MFA or not needing the MFA, I always tell people becoming a better writer is simple. You just read and write as much as possible. You do that every day and you'll become a better writer. But for some people, the MFA does offer like the structure needed and the time and space to pursue it on a regular basis.
And it gives you a network, a network of not just like professional network, but like other writers who are out here trying to do the same thing that you can just like, that might become that group that you stick with forever.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the Sharks Parlor. I imagine there's memorable nights. I know there are for me in my MFA program, memorable nights when you just are hanging out with your cohort and talking writing and hearing some of that writing. And that community is invaluable, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm really glad that you're enjoying your program, and I'm really glad you agreed to come here and talk to me. And thank you for reading those poems. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.